When the alert first came through the Air Force Rescue Coordination Center at Nellis, it arrived with the kind of clipped urgency that instantly tightens the chest of anyone who has ever worn the uniform. There was no dramatic siren, no shouting, no frantic rush, just a terse transmission reporting that an F-16C Fighting Falcon, piloted by 34-year-old Captain David Mercer, had vanished from radar during a routine high-altitude training drill above the Nevada Test and Training Range. In the military, the word vanished is rarely used. Aircraft crash, aircraft malfunction, aircraft deviate. But aircraft do not simply disappear. Yet this was exactly what the radar technicians reported. 1 second the transponder signal was strong, the IFF code solid, the telemetry perfect. The next second, the jet's digital heartbeat flatlined, as though someone had severed an invisible connection. Weather had been ideal, clear skies, stable temperatures, low winds. Mercer was a highly rated pilot with more than 1,000 hours on the frame, a man whose discipline was as polished as his flight suit boots. Nothing about the situation made sense. Within minutes, the 58th Rescue Squadron was mobilized. The pararescue jumpers, PJs, moved with swift, controlled efficiency, grabbing rucksacks, medical pouches, comm headsets, breaching tools, and the indispensable helmet-mounted camera systems required on all modern rescue operations. These were not designed for publicity. They were meant for after-action review, survival training, and mission debriefs. But many operators believed the cameras carried an unintended weight, the silent responsibility of documenting whatever could not be explained in words. The squadron commander, Lieutenant Colonel Hale, delivered a short, sharp briefing as the HH-60G Pave Hawks idled on the tarmac, rotors chopping the air with mechanical impatience. The objective: locate Mercer or any trace of his aircraft, secure the site, and extract all evidence. There was no expectation of combat, no forecast of hostile engagement. It was supposed to be a recovery job, difficult maybe but straightforward. The first insertion occurred 47 minutes after Mercer's disappearance. The helicopters skimmed low over the desert, slicing through a landscape that felt less like Earth and more like the skeletal memory of an ancient world. Jagged ridges, dry creek beds, cliffs warped by centuries of harsh winds. This terrain had swallowed men before, but never an entire aircraft without leaving a scar. The PJs fanned out, marking grid coordinates and scanning for the signature indicators of a crash. Reflective metal, scattered debris, scorched ground, emergency flares, parachute fabric, or the electronic beacons pilots carry. But the desert remained disturbingly immaculate, as though the sun itself had burned away any trace of human intrusion. The team expected at least a plume of smoke or the smell of fuel. Instead, they found only the sterile hush of open land, broken only by the crunch of boots and the distant thump of rotor blades. As the hours wore on, the unease grew thicker. Rescue missions always carried uncertainty, but this felt different, wrong, somehow like a puzzle with too many missing edges. Satellite reconnaissance was pulled. 2 MQ-9 drones were rerouted to provide thermal mapping of the wider region. Air Force analysts combed through Mercer's pre-flight data, cockpit voice recordings, and telemetry logs. Everything was normal until the abrupt cutoff. There was no spike in altitude, no engine anomaly, no defensive maneuver, no radio distress signal. Just a clean, silent erasure. Some of the older PJs whispered that the desert had a pulse of its own, an unpredictable, almost predatory nature. But even the grizzled veterans admitted they had never seen something so surgically unexplained. By late afternoon, the rescue team expanded their search perimeter outward by another 30 miles. The desert sun dipped low, painting the sand in long skeletal shadows. And that was when the first anomaly appeared: boot prints. 2 sets, one clearly belonging to Mercer's standard-issue flight boots, the other lighter, smaller, and unissued. They led directly across the basin toward a shallow canyon. As the PJs followed the trail, the prints became sharper, clearer, almost fresh, as though made hours, not minutes, earlier. But then, just 10 meters from the canyon mouth, the footprints stopped. Not faded, not scattered. Stopped. as if both individuals had simply stepped off the planet. The PJs recorded the entire scene, circling the prints, scanning for tracks, wind patterns, or signs of disturbance, but the sand around the final footprint was immaculate. No drag marks, no indentations, no collapse zones, nothing. The team stood silently, an unspoken dread rippling through the formation. Lieutenant Ortiz finally muttered what no one wanted to hear. People don't just vanish mid-step. Yet the evidence said they had. Back at the temporary operations base, the discovery triggered immediate escalation. Command ordered infrared sweeps, advanced motion detection, and ground-penetrating radar. Nothing showed. With daylight fading, the PJs continued to comb the area, marking every anomaly, every disturbance, every unnatural silence. Men who had survived firefights, helicopter crashes, and desert storms admitted privately that the air felt wrong, as if the environment itself was holding its breath. But the strangest discovery came just before nightfall. One of the combat cameramen, Staff Sergeant Rowe, realized that his helmet cam had been intermittently glitching, not like a digital malfunction, but more like interference from an unknown source. Each time the team approached the canyon mouth, the footage blurred for exactly 0.7 seconds, then stabilized. It repeated 11 times, identical each run. The chances of that happening randomly were infinitesimally small. It was as if the camera was capturing something the human eye could not perceive, something it attempted to process but could not translate. The day ended with no sign of Mercer, no crash site, no emergency beacon, and no rational explanation. But the rescue team knew one thing with chilling certainty. Whatever happened to Captain Mercer was not the result of mechanical failure, weather phenomena, or pilot error. Something else had occurred out there, something they could not define. And the desert, vast and silent, kept its secrets as the sun disappeared behind the jagged horizon. The second phase of the rescue operation began at first light, when the desert had not yet absorbed the sun's heat, and the chill still clung to the wind like a warning. A secondary team of pararescuemen, intelligence technicians, and 2 survival specialists boarded the HH-60 helicopters for deeper insertion into the canyon system, where the footprints had stopped. From above, the terrain looked carved by some ancient god, labyrinths of red sandstone, narrow gorges twisting into dark, hidden chambers, rock shelves jutting out at impossible angles. The rescue team wasn't dealing with open desert anymore. They were entering a geological maze that had swallowed travelers for centuries. But pilots didn't train in that area, and aircraft didn't crash there. For Mercer, or his unknown companion, to have reached this region on foot would have required time he did not have. Still, the team descended, ropes hissing through gloved hands as they lowered themselves into the canyon's shadowed throat. As the boots touched ground, the operators formed a tight perimeter. The first thing they noticed was an unnatural stillness. Normally, desert canyons echo with tiny sounds, the rustle of sand shifting, the scratch of lizards, the whisper of wind funneling through stone corridors. But here, the air seemed dead. Even comms crackled with faint distortion, forcing Sergeant Pike to adjust frequencies repeatedly. The men moved forward, tracing the path that any injured pilot might have taken. The canyon walls loomed above them like colossal sentinels, their surfaces marked with strange vertical scoring, deep, straight grooves in the stone that looked neither natural nor man-made. They were spaced evenly, perfectly parallel, almost mechanical. Rowe, the combat cameraman whose helmet cam had glitched the previous day, zoomed in on the markings. The moment he approached within 2 meters, his camera sputtered again, 0.7 seconds of static, identical to before. This time, even the audio cut. No wind, no ambient noise, only a suffocating silence. 20 minutes into the canyon, the team found the first physical clue since the footprints: Captain Mercer's survival radio. It was lodged at the base of a rock shelf, half buried in sand. But the radio was crushed, folded inward upon itself like soft clay rather than high-density military plastic. PJ Medic Ellis picked it up gingerly, his brow furrowing as he examined the warped frame. It would take thousands of pounds of pressure to deform the casing like that, yet there were no impact marks, no scratches, no signs of the violent collision one might expect. It was as if something had compressed it uniformly from all sides. Hale ordered every detail filmed. The radio, the sand, the surrounding rock, all of it was captured. Every operator felt the weight of the moment. Radios don't get crushed like that, not even in extreme crashes. Something had acted upon it. Climbing higher into the canyon, the team discovered more anomalies that defied explanation. In several sections, patches of vegetation, normally sparse desert shrubs, were burned in perfect circular patterns. Not charred from above like lightning strikes, nor scorched in irregular patterns like incendiary residue. These scorch marks were symmetrical, identical in diameter, and completely dead at the center while untouched at the edges. Escorting analysts later suggested electrical discharge, but the team on the ground sensed something else. The burn marks hummed faintly, too faint for ears, but enough to make the hairs on the back of the neck rise. Electromagnetic? Weaponized? Experimental? None of those answers sat comfortably with the men who saw it firsthand. Farther in, the canyon narrowed to a bottleneck no wider than 2 men. Light dimmed. The walls felt unnaturally smooth, almost polished, as though carved by machinery rather than time. When the team attempted to pass through, every electronic device, from helmet cams to GPS tablets, began glitching. Not randomly, but rhythmically. Short pulses of distortion that flickered like a blinking eye. Sergeant Ortiz ran a diagnostic on his multi-tool reader. The interference was not natural. It behaved like a signal, concentrated, directional, intelligent. The operators exchanged uneasy glances. This rescue mission was beginning to resemble something far removed from standard military operations. They pressed deeper. At the heart of the bottleneck, they found traces, barely visible marks in the sand that suggested something had been dragged. But not human. The grooves were too wide, too smooth, and perfectly symmetrical. They ran 20 meters, then ended abruptly at a rock wall with a faint indentation that looked like it had been briefly illuminated or heated. Ellis touched the rock and immediately withdrew his hand. "Warm," he whispered. But the canyon had been cold all morning. Something had heated that surface recently. When Rowe pointed his camera at it, the device froze, then rebooted without prompt. Not a normal malfunction. Not caused by impact. The camera had simply shut down for 3 full seconds, longer than the usual 0.7-second distortion, before snapping back online. From this point onward, morale shifted. The men were trained to face the impossible, crashes, firefights, rescues under enemy fire, but the unknown unnerves even the bravest soldiers. Protocol dictated that they push forward until they found something definitive. Yet the canyon around them felt more like a trap, like a place carefully sculpted to swallow evidence. Hale ordered the team to proceed another half-mile. At the next bend, they encountered the most disturbing detail yet. Embedded in the canyon floor was a piece of Mercer's flight suit, specifically the Velcro shoulder name tag. It had been sheared off cleanly, edges burned in that same perfect circular pattern seen on the vegetation. But there was no other debris. No fabric fragments. No blood. No footprints. The tag lay alone, pristine except for the impossibly precise burn marks. And then comms dropped completely. No signal. No static. Just a dead channel. The operators froze, checking systems, scanning for visual threats. The atmosphere thickened like static before a storm. The canyon felt alive, breathing, listening. Rowe's camera captured the moment the team realized something was watching them. Not a creature. Not an enemy. Something else. Though nothing moved, every soldier sensed it, a presence, invisible yet impossibly near. That's when Hale made the call. "We're pulling back. Now. Mark the coordinates. Full withdrawal. We regroup and reassess." But none of them knew that the strangest part of the mission, the part that would make national headlines in the days to come, had not yet occurred. Because only the cameras would make it out. The withdrawal began with the kind of controlled urgency that only seasoned operators can maintain. Steady movements, constant scanning, no wasted breath, no unnecessary noise. But every man in that canyon felt the shift, the invisible tightening of the air that made the walls seem to lean inward. What had begun as a rescue operation now felt like a retreat from something they could not name, something that didn't belong in any military manual or survival handbook. As the team retraced their steps toward the wider mouth of the canyon, the eerie distortion that had plagued their helmet cams grew more frequent. The familiar 0.7-second static bursts now expanded unpredictably, some lasting 2 seconds, others fragmenting the visuals into jagged, ghostly silhouettes. It was as if the cameras were struggling to process the environment, like they were capturing something just beyond human perception, shapes, movement, light patterns, yet unable to render them clearly. The men couldn't see anything with their own eyes, but the equipment sensed something. Hale kept his voice low and steady, issuing crisp orders into a radio that no longer returned so much as a whisper. The complete comms blackout made the situation exponentially more dangerous. SOP dictated that if all communications failed in a narrow canyon environment, the team had a window of approximately 30 minutes to reach open air before the operation escalated into a Category Red emergency. But the canyon's oppressive silence made it feel like they were navigating underwater. Even their footsteps felt muted, swallowed by something unseen. When they approached the bottleneck, the narrow passage that had earlier triggered synchronized interference, every operator instinctively slowed. Something was wrong. The smooth walls, once merely unsettling, now seemed to pulse subtly, as though heat shimmered through the stone in irregular waves. Ellis, at the front of the column, raised a fist to signal a halt. The moment the team stopped, Rose's camera abruptly shifted out of focus, then snapped into an image no one expected. A bright, vertical strip of light at the far end of the bottleneck, flickering like a distant flame behind frosted glass. But when Roe lowered the camera and looked with his own eyes, the light was gone, nothing but the same dim, shadowed canyon walls. The soldiers exchanged uneasy glances. Was it an optical phenomenon? A glitch? Or had Roe's equipment recorded something that didn't exist in the visible spectrum? Before anyone could answer, a low vibration rippled through the ground, so faint that most of the team felt it only through their boots. A tremor? No, it wasn't seismic. It was directional, almost intentional, like the hum of distant machinery buried beneath the earth. Move, Hale ordered, voice hardening. Eyes forward, weapons safe, keep spacing. No stopping. The tremor faded as abruptly as it had begun, but every man's pulse raced. They maneuvered through the bottleneck, but as they reached its midpoint, the temperature dropped sharply. Breath turned visible. Frost, actual frost, appeared on the canyon walls, forming delicate branching crystals that grew in seconds. It made no sense. The outside temperature was rising with the morning sun. The sudden cold pressed against their faces like an unnatural exhale. Then, without warning, Ortiz's wrist compass spun violently, breaking the glass. At the same moment, the backup analog compass mounted on Pike's chest plate snapped its needle to a fixed point, straight toward the canyon's sealed rock end where the footprints had vanished. Hale didn't hesitate. Keep moving. Do not look back. But some of the men couldn't help themselves. As they passed the final stretch of narrow corridor, Roe, breathing hard, more from unease than exertion, turned his camera back for one final sweep. Later, in the analysis room, investigators would slow down the footage frame by frame and swear that for exactly 0.2 seconds the camera captured a distortion in the shape of a figure standing at the far end of the bottleneck. Not a clear silhouette, not a human, not an animal, but a tall, vertical form with no definable features, more like a column of condensed air. Yet at that moment, Roe saw nothing with his own eyes. The men continued forward, unaware of what the camera had caught. Once they exited the bottleneck and returned to the wider canyon floor, the oppressive cold lifted instantly. Temperature stabilized. Frost evaporated. But their comms did not return. Pike tried every emergency frequency, tapping into both encrypted and open channels, but the radio remained dead. Ortiz waved his handheld thermal reader across the canyon mouth to check for environmental anomalies, only to watch the screen pixelate into a swirling mass, as if heat signatures were present everywhere and nowhere at once. Ellis, still carrying the crushed survival radio in his pack, whispered, "Whatever happened to Mercer? He didn't just crash. Something interacted with him." The men pushed toward the exfil point marked earlier by a chemical light stick. But as they approached, something else caught their attention. Small metallic flecks scattered across the sand, shimmering faintly in the sunlight. They knelt to examine them. At first glance, they looked like debris from aircraft instrumentation, thin slivers, reflective, unnaturally smooth. But upon closer inspection, the pieces appeared melted at the edges, as though exposed to extreme heat. Ellis picked one up, but dropped it immediately with a hiss. It was warm. Not burning, not scorching, but unnervingly warm for something that had supposedly been exposed to a cold desert night. When they placed the metallic fragment inside a sample bag, the plastic softened slightly, reacting as if the metal emitted low-grade radiation or an unknown thermal signature. And then the canyon began to echo, not with voices, not with footsteps, but with a sound so faint it was almost imagined. A distant metallic click, then another. Rhythmic. Deliberate. Not natural. Not wind. The team froze. Hale raised his hand, scanning the ridges. No movement. No shadows. Nothing visible. But the clicking continued, growing slightly louder with each pulse, like something coordinating or triangulating. The men exchanged tense looks. They were not alone. Go. Now, Hale ordered, voice low. Double time. Do not engage unless engaged. The team sprinted across the canyon mouth toward the extraction point where the second helicopter was scheduled to land. The rhythmic clicking faded behind them, swallowed once again by the desert's unnatural silence. When they reached the open ground outside the canyon, a gust of warm wind hit them, normal desert wind, almost comforting after the suffocating stillness inside. And at that exact moment, their radios crackled back to life, flooding with overlapping signals, missed calls, and frantic updates from command. But what disturbed the rescue commanders most was not the team's report. It was the fact that, without warning, without command, without human interaction, every helmet camera in the unit automatically uploaded its final 3 minutes of footage to the base server. Footage the soldiers had not yet seen. Footage that would show things none of them could explain. Footage, recorded in the canyon after the men had already left it. The room fell into a tense, suffocating silence as the analysts queued up the final recovered feed. The one pulled from Captain Mercer's own cockpit camera, extracted automatically from the aircraft's flight log moments before the jet vanished from radar. No one had seen it yet, not even the intelligence officers. When the first frame flickered onto the screen, every man leaned forward. The footage began inside the cockpit, steady and clear. Mercer's breathing was calm, professional, exactly what one would expect from a veteran pilot. He was flying routine maneuvers, the desert sprawled endlessly below. But then, a slight tremor in his voice caught everyone's attention. Control, I'm seeing something. Off my 9 o'clock. Negative, it's not an aircraft. I don't know what it is. His helmet cam tilted as he turned. The video zoomed toward a faint ripple in the air just outside the jet, a distortion like heat waves bending light. It moved with deliberate intent, maintaining formation with the F-16 at impossible speed. Mercer steadied his breathing, but his pulse, visible on HUD telemetry, spiked. The distortion expanded, blooming outward until it dwarfed the jet. And then, for the first time in the entire operation, the camera captured clarity. A towering column of luminescent haze, shifting with an intelligence that could not be mistaken for natural phenomena. The object pulsed once, bright enough to wash out the cockpit instruments, and Mercer raised a hand to shield his eyes. The desert vanished. Daylight dissolved. In its place, the same void the team had seen in the canyon footage enveloped the aircraft, a dark expanse filled with distant, unnatural points of light arranged in spirals and segments that twisted in ways no star field ever could. Mercer's voice cut through the radio, choked with shock. This isn't Earth. This isn't anything. His instruments spun uselessly. Altitude 0. Airspeed 0. Orientation, undefined. The camera recorded a sound then, a deep resonant hum that vibrated through the bunker's speakers, making several operators recoil instinctively. It was not atmospheric, not mechanical. It felt communicative, as if whatever held Mercer had no intention of harming him, but also no concept of what harm even meant. Then the shimmering entity appeared outside the cockpit canopy again, closer than before. Mercer whispered, "What are you?" His voice cracked, not from fear, but from the sheer impossibility of what he was witnessing. The entity pulsed again, sending shockwaves of distortion rippling across the void. The camera momentarily lost focus, and when it regained clarity, the canopy was open, not shattered or cut, simply gone, as though removed from existence. A tendril of the shimmering substance extended toward Mercer. He didn't scream, didn't fight. He simply stared, mesmerized and terrified. As the luminous distortion wrapped around his arm, The camera captured a single frame of Mercer's face, eyes wide, lips parted, not in agony but in awe. Then he and the entity vanished in a flash of white light, leaving the cockpit empty. The F-16 rematerialized above the desert an instant later, hurtling downward with no pilot, no canopy, and no structural damage other than the missing section. The jet plummeted until the footage cut, matching the exact second the aircraft disappeared from radar. When the bunker lights slowly brightened, no one spoke. Even the intelligence officers were pale, shaken by what they had just witnessed. Ellis wiped his eyes without bothering to hide it. Ortiz crossed himself. Rowe sat down heavily, unable to process the enormity of the truth. General Rollins finally broke the silence, voice barely above a whisper. This never leaves this room. The United States is not prepared to explain or understand what we've seen. He looked at Hale, an expression of helplessness crossing the face of a man who rarely showed emotion. Mercer is gone. Not dead. Not missing. Just gone. Hale swallowed hard. Sir, what do we tell his family? Rollins closed his eyes. We tell them what they can bear. That his jet suffered catastrophic failure. That no remains were recoverable. That he served honorably. The words tasted false, even cruel, but what alternative existed? No nation on Earth could openly admit that a pilot had been taken by an unknown, possibly intelligent force no human technology could track or fight. Hale exhaled shakily, knowing the truth would haunt him for the rest of his life. The intelligence officers shut down the monitors and began sealing every digital trace of the footage, encrypting it behind layers of classification even the president wouldn't casually access. The rescue team was debriefed, sworn to secrecy, and dismissed under guard until cleared to return to duty. That night, Hale stood alone on the edge of the runway, watching the red beacons of distant aircraft blink against the Nevada sky. The desert wind whispered through the darkness, carrying with it the same eerie silence they'd felt inside the canyon. He knew Mercer was out there somewhere no human had ever been, somewhere from which no one had ever returned. And deep inside, he feared the truth no commander dared speak aloud. Mercer hadn't been the first to vanish into that mysterious void, and he would not be the last.